Joining me in studio, we get to discuss a different race. The race for mayor, a very important race going on here locally, one that, all the city council races I think have been overshadowed by the national campaigns and then also a little bit by the District 19 race. Todd Klein in studio, candidate for mayor. Welcome back. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
Good. We had you on, I think, right after you announced that you were running. So what have you been hearing from the residents out there? I know that you've been walking a lot of blocks. You've been talking to a lot of people. So what are you hearing from residents that you talk to?
Well, I think they want predictability in their government. They want it to be limited, to be restrained, and they want to see more opportunities for their kids to stay in the town. A lot of people. I'm born and raised Lubbockite graduate. I'm born and raised Lubbockite, and a lot of my friends now live in areas outside of Lubbock, and it's because of jobs. So that's a big one. So we need to be fostering an environment that's conducive to that, and we do it not by picking winners and losers, but by keeping taxes, fees, regulations as low as possible. Well,
and this was something that was brought up in last night's forum, which was, what can the city council do to create more jobs? What can the city council do to keep people here? And you let it off in the right way by saying, well, we don't create jobs, we create an atmosphere, which is the correct answer. That a lot of politicians out there they don't give that. They give, look how many jobs I created. So, what in your mind, as far as the city council goes, what can they do right now that maybe they haven't done in the past to create that more business-friendly atmosphere?
Well, I think you're going to find that my voting record is the most conservative out there, consistently voting against tax increases, working to hold the line on the taxes. And I think it's just continuing what we did while I was on the council for 2 terms. We've got to open up LEDA more. And we really need to change the dynamic. Over time, it needs to be more we're growing our own talent as opposed to we're trying to bring people in, especially. And what we've got to avoid are mistakes we've had in the past where we'd bring somebody in or open up a tax abatement to advantage one company, sometimes outside the community, sometimes starting up within the community at the expense of the very people that are funding those taxes, our local businessmen and women. And so we've got to avoid those mistakes, and I think we've got to continue to strategic partnerships. I think, working more with the school district and other entities, we've got to be the model for education for our students. Our students, the more educated they are, the more opportunities they've got, and continue to foster an environment. Don't go after things like Uber. Focus on the essentials. Take care of those contingencies so that when we have an emergency, that's addressed, as opposed to focusing on those peripheral issues, whether it be Uber, whether it be picking winners and losers. Take care of core services. Stay within your lane.
Last night, a issue was brought up and this is brought up in every election, debt. You hear every single politician who's running for, whether it be this office or national office, they're talking about debt. For this office, you were on the city council. The debt load did increase while you were on the city council. So when you talk about decreasing the debt while running for mayor, how can those who are looking at this and going, well, while you were on the city council, y'all didn't help things out. The debt load was added to during that time. So how can you say now, well, we want to reduce debt? How does that work?
Sure. Nobody likes debt. So 2 things. One, I don't ever hear that from anybody other than a fellow candidate. What I hear from people is, hey, I'm glad we got Lake Allen Henry online. We needed it a few years ago. I'm glad we've got the sewer situation underway and taken care of. Beyond that, I served during the increase. Nobody wanted to see us have to take care of water or sewer, but we needed to, so we did. Beyond that, I was also on the council when it leveled out. So I've got the same record that current members have, which is we've seen it plateau over, I guess, about the last 4 years, as I recall. So I've seen it go up, but I've also worked to contain it. But the main thing that just differentiates me from a lot of candidates is I've got a record of actually governing. And when we were governing, we focused on things like making sure we didn't CO soccer fields, which would have been popular. There was a suggestion by some of my peers, well, let's look at maybe doing that. No, it needs to go before the voters. Ultimately, it seemed like a very popular project. It went down, as I recall, fairly handedly. Mm-hmm. But let the voters decide those issues. We should be doing general obligation bonds for those things that are core essential services. And only whenever it's emergency and timely, we've got to. Beyond that, we need to do more COs. So I've got a track record of opening up the process, containing the debt where we can. And so I think whenever I visit with people, I hear people say, I appreciate you guys getting things taken care of. What are you going to do going forward? Well, going forward, we need to have a strategic plan for our budget. We ought to have a group of private citizens with expertise in the field look at our budget. We, as a council, often get sort of jammed into, you've got a few months to decide a budget. Now, it still gives me enough time, especially if I'm mayor, to work to break that knot up. But we need to look longer term and make sure we're taking care of only needs and not wants. Beyond that, we need a strategic oversight of our ordinances. I think our local ordinances have gotten too big and often unenforceable and unessential. So I think we need to look at those core essential services, stay within our lane, keep government as limited and restrained as possible.
When it comes to government spending, I think you were on the show when about a month ago or so when you said that you would have been for putting Citizens Tower to a vote. You're still in favor of doing that, correct?
If that's at all possible, it should be. Just on principle, it's the new city hall, so it's obviously by definition not a core essential service. Has the train gotten too far out of the station? I think that's what City Hall is suggesting. I think if I'm elected, I'll be looking closely at that. My preference would be, as I said before I left the council, if we can trust people to put us on the council, we can trust them to vote on these issues for themselves. At that point in time, we could have had a vote, and I suspect we wouldn't have been looking at a new $65 million, I think is the number that was given out at one point in time, City Hall. But if we can't do a vote, we ought to at least have as much government open, transparent process as possible and let the voters be as much a part of the process as possible through public hearings, et cetera. In
your mind, where do you draw the line? Where is the line as far as, okay, I think you said too far out of the stable, but where does the Omni Building become at a point where you just go, okay, well, it's we've done enough work on this. We can't just give up now. We have to move forward.
I think one of the markers is issuance of debt. So once we become so encumbered that we can't get out of it, and that may be where we're heading. So at that point in time, but my preference is, as I've said, as far back as over 2 years ago, from the very beginning as a sitting council member, this is not a core essential service. We should put this before the voters. Unfortunately, I was the only voice on the council saying that. I think we ought to have the same thing when it comes to tornado sirens. For a job that doesn't pay anything, I'm willing to serve, but I don't want to serve in a situation where we're not allowing the voters to decide on issues that are obvious that they should. So tornado sirens, we ought to have a vote on that as well.
What are those issues where it's obvious the voters should decide? Because, I think some candidates have mentioned fire stations are something that the voters should decide. Tornado sirens, I'm sure there are some out there, and I think you're in favor of tornado sirens. I'm in favor of them.
I'm in between. So, I think an argument can be made, but as long as you have some people that may really need those items, we ought to at least let the voters decide on it. When it comes to fire stations, I personally think that this is one of the reasons that I didn't reflexively go out and say we should always annex. We can't give with the left hand and take with the right hand. You can't say that downtown is the most important issue on the table and then work to get as close to, if not beyond, Wolford as possible. It's working against yourself. I think that we've got to have strategic plans in place, a master plan for what we ought to be looking at in terms of annexation. And we ought to have an impact and feasibility study given. It's one of the things that I pushed for. Unfortunately, there was pushback, and I never was able to have the city manager come before the council, before I was off the council, and say, here's what it looks like. We need to be doing that. Then we know if you annex people, especially people that are already outside the county, you have a moral, if not fiduciary responsibility to provide them essential core services. So I think you do provide, as an understanding of annexation, new fire stations. But we have got to be honest with people. There is an expense to annexing. There also is a benefit. It's usually deferred about 20 years out. Yeah. So let the public, which is almost always 2 steps ahead of the council, having served on the council or any other level of government, let them in on the discussion. It improves the process and it provides that integrity that we need.
When we come back, we've got a little bit more annexation talk to get into. Also, some things that were brought up in last night's forum that we can talk about, and a lot of other things impacting the Lubbock City Council right now and going forward. And, of course, your calls as well. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Todd Klein in studio.
Good
candidate
morning.
For mayor. Let's get back into this annexation deal because it's been a big issue, obviously, lately over at Lubbock City Hall. From what you know about the current annexation plans, where they're moving, obviously, southwest. There are a group of citizens who have not wanted to be annexed. City councils have been debating, sort of I guess, not really an opt-out clause, but a, hey, you're not going to be touched for, what, I think it's 20 years maybe?
I believe so.
If you were on the council right now and you were mayor, what would your, I guess, approach be towards this?
Yeah, it's hard to say as I look at it from 30,000 feet, but I can refer back to what I've done in the past and just rely on core consistent principles. And that's what I'd always say on the council is if I'm not predictable, if I'm not living up to what I articulate as the guiding principles, then something either has gone askew or new information has come on. So just looking at it from just core right of private property, I have some concerns. And I think as you develop out with an outer loop, you're going to see more expansion over time. What you've got to do for those that live outside the community is also telecast to them what you're looking at. People should know. Government should be predictable. Nobody should buy a house. I remember on the council one time we had a planned community where all of a sudden they wanted, after they had built out, the recession hit, served during a Great Recession, and they weren't able to build what they wanted, so they wanted to completely change that. Well, you can't sell people a property with the expectation that this is what you're going to have and then change it on them. So I voted against it, led the cause to vote against it, led the cause to vote against some of those where people were opposed to living in the city, and they had clearly moved far enough out where they weren't wanting to. So you've got to carve them out. You also have to make sure that you're careful. You've got floodplains, et cetera, in that area, and that means future capitalization, future debt issues. So as we do smart growth, it needs to be just that, smart growth, and it also needs to have a master plan that's discussed openly and presently available, whether you go to the website or something like that. That should be the goal, so that taxpayers know what they're looking at in terms of future growth and how much they're going to be expected to pay, and people that want to plan communities know what's going on. But the problem right now is it's just been ad hoc. It hasn't really been telecasted. There hasn't been a feasibility impact type statement arrangement. During my entire tenure on the council, that's something I pushed for, we couldn't get. But I think as mayor, you have some advantages there. So calling some public hearings on that would be something I would do early on so that property rights are protected. In fact, we need to change the city charter, and I'll make a little bit of news here. I haven't discussed this previously. But we ought to have 2/3 votes on some of these issues. When it comes to your unalienable rights, what are given to you by Creator and can't be taken from you by government, not legitimately, you ought to have 2/3 votes for annexation. We've never de-annexed, so that's as indelible as it gets.
Right.
Same thing for condemnation, those kinds of issues. We've got to protect rights at the local level. There may be a bigger role for government at the local level than at the federal level, but we've got the same issues. We have to respect core, essential principles of what it means to live in this country and protect those rights that should not ever be infringed by government.
Well, let me ask you this. So last night in the forum, 2 of your opponents were spending some time going after one of your other opponents, Dan Pope, for downtown and his, I guess, investments in downtown. And I guess they were alluding to the fact that people should be concerned about that. When you look at, and again, this is a race, this, it's politics. Mm-hmm. Should voters be concerned? Are you concerned that about his investments in downtown Lubbock? And should that be something that voters out there are concerned about if someone gets elected to become mayor? They're on the city council, downtown redevelopment, obviously huge. Mm-hmm. that they would personally or maybe personally benefit from that? Is that something that they should be concerned about?
Well, two things. One, I focus on affirmatively what I'm campaigning on. Number two, I think Dan can speak to any conflicts of interest better than I can. It's not a race I'm running where I'm running around with gotcha politics or attempting to spend the time lobbing bombs at other people. Dan can speak to that, and I think he will, and I think he started to. And then as far as downtown development goes in general, I'm for it. I support it as a part of our community. But we have to recognize that that is a private sector arena at this point in time. And if government should be limited and restrained and predictable, I think my record has been just that we've got to do more of that through the private sector. It'll take time, so it's like the budget. We have to be prudent, which is what I was doing when I was on the council and what I'll do if I'm elected, not to put things on the debt, i.e. a new city hall without more government, without more public involvement. That's not a core essential service. And number two, be patient. As that starts to mature out, things like water, wastewater, what we call sewer, those are the lion's share of your debt. About 62% is water-related, sewer-related. Be patient. Much of that has started to mature out already. And if we don't add a bunch more to it that we don't need to, it'll start to go down. So same thing with downtown. Let's be patient and let the private sector do that.
Last night, another issue was brought up, that is the Coliseum and the Auditorium. There would have to be a public vote in order to hand that back over to Texas Tech. Where are you? Are you in favor of that proposal? It sounded like three of your opponents were in favor of that proposal last night. Are you in favor of that?
You're asking if I reflexively think it ought to go back to Tech. I don't think so. I think it ought to be decided by the public, and that's the beauty of the process. I think it's going to be a very expensive proposition to tear down, just the way it was constructed, and talking to architects over the years, because this has been an ongoing discussion since before I was on the council. The tear down would be immensely expensive, and I think the university historically has suggested we should take care of that. So the public should consider that also. I think it's easier to repurpose a facility than it is to build a new one. So for that reason, historically, I enjoy going to the auditorium and the Coliseum. The Coliseum is nice. It was never finished out the way it was originally intended, but it's still been a very nice facility. But I think the public should decide that issue. And personally, if we can repurpose it more cheaply, let's be data-driven and have that discussion so that we know what the facts are. And then it's like tornado sirens or other issues. Let the public decide based on the information, the data. And if I can be shown that it's cheaper to keep it, then personally I'm going to support keeping it. But that ought to be a public decision, and it's required to, which is the beautiful part I was referring to last night, by city charter.
You have a town hall coming up this weekend, correct?
Thank you so much. 2 o'clock, Coffee Undergrounds, 34th in Indiana. Come by. Look forward to visiting with you this Tuesday, and I hope to knock on your door soon. If you have any questions for me that I can't answer today, call me at 780-3000. That's my home number. Look forward to visiting.
All right. Todd Klein, thank you very much.